Hey everybody, welcome back to CoronaChat. I'm Caitlin, and today is Thursday, June 25th. And one of the questions we've been hearing a lot over the last week or so is why this disease became a pandemic. Right? There's been other outbreaks in the past, like SARS, MERS, and Ebola, to name a few, but they didn't become a full-scale global crisis, even though in some ways they were much scarier than COVID. So why not? This is a great question, and so we wanted to spend today's show diving into some of the reasons that COVID-19 became a global scourge where other illnesses have not. And in short, it has to do both with the nature of the virus itself and this unique geopolitical moment that we're living in. So first, the science. SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, is a coronavirus, right? Just like lots of other illnesses like SARS and MERS and even certain strains of the common cold. All of these viruses are part of the family of coronaviruses, and like any family, while there are some similarities between the members, there are also a lot of differences. In contrast, Ebola is not a coronavirus. It's a filovirus, meaning it looks like a little squiggly strand of spaghetti rather than a round virus with all these little prongs sticking out, for those who are interested. And Ebola is radically different than SARS, MERS, and COVID-19. But since it was one of the last big pandemics that we were really worried about globally, we're going to talk about it tonight too. So from our human perspective, right, three of the differences that really matter when we compare viruses have to do with how infectious the virus is, how sick it makes us, and how long it takes for it to make us ill. We're not exactly sure how infectious the virus that causes COVID-19 is, but it seems like it's a bit more infectious than SARS, fairly more infectious than Ebola, and a lot more infectious than MERS. And because it's a respiratory illness, it can be spread by coughing and sneezing or just breathing the air around someone who's sick, which is why masks and social distancing are so important in stopping the spread of the virus. This is a really big difference as compared to something like Ebola or HIV that require the exchange of bodily fluids, right? And so there are also big differences in how sick these viruses make us and how likely it is that they will kill us. As you've probably heard, there's a lot of debate about the case fatality rate or mortality rate of COVID-19. And both of these are technical terms for how deadly the virus is. And they mean slightly different things and are calculated in different ways, but for our purposes, we can think about them both as telling us how likely it is that you'll die if you get infected. Again, there's a lot of debate about just how lethal COVID-19 is, but the case fatality rates reported by different countries in the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center generally range from 0.1% to 16%, with Yemen reporting a whopping 27%. And these numbers mean that for every 1,000 people infected, we can expect somewhere between 1 and 160 of those people to die. Now with SARS, case fatality seems to be around 9%, meaning that we would expect to see 90 deaths per every 1,000 people who are infected. MERS is much more deadly, with a case fatality rate around 34%, meaning that for every 1,000 people who get infected, we would expect to see 340 of them die. And Ebola is often reported as having a case fatality rate somewhere between 60% and 85%, meaning that well over half the people who get it will die. And these high case fatality rates for MERS and Ebola are a big part of why we were so worried about these illnesses and moved to act so quickly. Finally, there's also a big difference in how long it takes for these viruses to make us sick, something infectious disease specialists refer to as the incubation period. This is the amount of time it takes from when the virus enters your body to when you start developing symptoms. And the incubation period for COVID is pretty long. Although most people seem to develop symptoms within 5 days or so, some people don't develop the first symptoms until nearly 2 weeks after they've been infected. And this is a big contrast with SARS, for example, where most people develop symptoms within 2 to 7 days. But perhaps the most important thing is that infected people can spread COVID-19 well before they feel bad and suspect that they might be sick. And this is not the case for a virus like Ebola, where people are only infectious once they've developed symptoms and are visibly sick. And all of this stuff matters because it means that this virus is pretty infectious, pretty serious, and perhaps most importantly, it can spread long distances and infect lots of people before that infected person, that first one, knows that they're sick and contagious. And these things combined make a virus that poses a really big public health problem. But as Dr. Larry Brilliant, an epidemiologist best known for his work to eradicate smallpox, once said, outbreaks are inevitable, pandemics are optional. And this speaks to the political side of all of this. Now, when I say political, I'm not talking about partisan politics. I mean the overall set of decisions that leaders make, including the policies they put into place, and the other kinds of decisions that they're making. In other words, politics as a whole. Outbreaks happen. Infectious diseases are part of the world that we live in, and even with the best vaccines and medicines. Viruses, bacteria, and parasites, they're a part of nature too, and like any other element of nature, they seek to reproduce themselves. That reproductive cycle requires getting a host sick, and this is why outbreaks are inevitable. But in deciding how to respond to an outbreak, we have a choice. We can share information about the outbreak and take collective action to stop the spread. There are things we can do as individuals, like wearing masks when we're out and about, or quarantining at home if there's any chance we might have been exposed. And there are actions that we can take as societies, like sending emergency resources to hospitals in the areas that are most affected, and making sure that people have enough food, water, and cash to ride out a lockdown at home. These actions slow the spread and can contain an outbreak before it becomes a pandemic, sickening thousands or millions of people all around the world. And as a world full of interconnected and independent societies, we made the choice to take those actions to stop SARS, to stop MERS, to stop Ebola before they became huge global crises. They were still major pandemics that killed thousands of people, and we should have acted faster and more forcefully. But they never got as bad as what we're living through now. That's because this time, most countries decided they were better off trying to ride this out on their own. Instead of sharing clear information about the virus from the beginning, China tried to cover things up. Instead of all pulling together to develop a common test the way WHO recommended, the US decided to develop its own test from scratch. And rather than sending resources and supplies to hard-hit hospitals in China and Spain and Italy, the world responded by stockpiling supplies in case they might need to use them themselves at some point in the future. Every single one of these decisions created delays that got in our way in terms of containing the virus at its source, right? So every step along the way, we've had the choice to work together to contain the virus and prevent it from becoming a global pandemic. But instead, we've chosen to try to do it alone. It's kind of like we're all on a life raft in the middle of the ocean, right? And instead of rowing together to try to get to shore, we're all more focused on trying to push all the other people off the raft. And the only way that this ends is that we all fall in the ocean. But all is not lost. We still have the opportunity to set our differences aside and try to come together. We can each make personal choices to help knit our societies back together by choosing to take care of one another, to do something like wear a mask that might inconvenience us personally, but means that other people will stay safe, right? We can try to do the less selfish thing, and we can try to push our leaders to also make those same choices. And the question is, what will we choose? So that's our show for tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, stay safe, take care of each other, and remember, we are all in this together. We'll see you all back next week.